Hello, I'm Davis, and I like to play video games. One game in particular that I like to play is Stardew Valley. One might say that it was my favorite game, and I wouldn't correct them. Now, as with many games, if you play long enough, you may start to grow a desire to mix up the gameplay a bit, modify the experience, if you will. Luckily, to accomplish this, the Stardew Valley community has developed some robust tools. This has led to a plethora of mods with which you can change things as simple as character sprites or adding new items, to quality of life changes like helpful UI interfaces. You can even fully change the game mechanics entirely. I myself have dabbled in the occasional mod here and there, like Stardew Valley Expanded. Okay, so mostly just here, no there, whatever. The point is, our story today begins with my curiosity about how I could go about making my own mod. Now, I'm no professional programmer, but I would consider myself a hobbyist. And by that, I mean I've done dozens of beginner's tutorials in multiple programming languages, and while I feel as though I've got a pretty good grasp on the absolute fundamentals, I've hit that wall that comes with being self-taught outside the traditional educational program, where you don't know what you're supposed to learn next, and everything you look up is either far too over your head or just a repeat of the arrays, variables, and if statements you've seen before. Talk about an infinite loop, am I right? It's just a little programming humor for the easily amused. Anyway, I'm at that point where you just kind of have to pick a project and jump in the deep end, Googling your specific questions as you come to them with no regard of how the present decisions will affect your project as a whole down the line. So I thought, heck, I'll just make a mod. To get me started, there is, conveniently, a lot of information on the Stardew Valley wiki about how modding works and documentation of the architecture of the game's data. What I gleaned from that documentation is that there are two basic types of mods for Stardew. There are cosmetic mods, which use a modding tool called Content Patcher to change the game's data files like sprites and dialogue. So if you want the color scheme of the game to have a more natural feel, you can make a mod that is essentially just a folder of new image files to replace the ones in the game. The other type of mod is a C# mod, where you actually program your own changes to the game's code. You can still make those cosmetic changes with a C# mod, you just have to do all the programming yourself. Content Patcher is actually a C# mod that acts as a framework, handling all the actual programming so you can focus on the visuals. Now, while I will reiterate that the Stardew Valley wiki is exceptionally thorough, it is a little hard to digest as a newbie. So I did turn to YouTube to look for some tutorials that might assist me in my endeavors. When I started this journey about 2 years ago, I struggled to find any relevant video tutorials. Just about every single video was the same directions for how to download Smappy and Content Patcher, and use Nexus to download whatever mod you wanted. I just wanted someone to walk me through replacing some assets, and I was just bombarded with top 10 popular Stardew mod videos. Now, however, as I try to provide evidence of this, it seems that there are actually a good deal of tutorials that would have been helpful. Some of which have been posted since the time I was searching, but there are others that I'm not sure why I couldn't find them back then. Anyway, I ended up stumbling on a little playlist on a channel called Harv's Back, which was exactly what I was looking for. Shout out Harv. After dipping my toes into the mod creation waters and making a Content Patcher mod where I just replaced some of the character portraits, I was watching a Charlie Barley stream where she was playing Stardew with a mod pack that added a bunch of Pokemon themes to the game. During the stream, I couldn't help but notice that the wild horseradish was not replaced with a sprite of Oddish, and that seemed like an insane oversight. At some point, Charlie asked to be sent any other Pokemon mods that people might know about, and since I was now clearly a modding expert, I decided I could fix such a travesty. As I delved into making my second ever mod, the creative juices must have really been flowing because the scope quickly grew far beyond just adding Oddish and started to include other Pokemon such as Ditto as Bugmeat, Executor as the Palm Trees, and even Mr. Mime.
Oh my god! Pammy, you're looking a little different today. Each day is just the same as the last. I absolutely love this, like, existential dialogue paired with Mr. Mime being like,
I made Pam Mr. Mime, and I won't apologize. So I published my mod and sent the link to Charlie, and it was included in the subsequent streams. And everyone loved it and slept soundly with zero nightmares.
Alright, hi. This is literally the most menacing screen I have ever seen. I can't, this is so cursed. I hate that a lot. hate that. Oh god. That's horrible. That's the worst thing I've ever seen. That's the worst moment I've ever had playing a video game, I think.
One other replacement I wanted to add extended the scope of the project so much that I was going to have to evolve from just a content patcher mod to a C# mod. I had what I thought was a clever idea to replace the log blocking the way to the secret woods with a Snorlax. It was a perfect homage to the Pokemon games where Snorlax blocks your path until you wake it up with the Pokeflute. But I couldn't just do the same simple asset swap because Snorlax would still be a log under the hood, and you would still have to remove it in the manner in which you would remove a log. So in an effort to protect the player from being traumatized, notwithstanding Mr. Pam, I would need to prevent the player from using their axe on Snorlax. And I know I just said I made the palm trees executors, but chopping them would be a decision made by the player. If they want access to the secret woods, they wouldn't really have another legitimate choice to get around Snorlax. If you know, you know. Plus, I made a mod option in the config menu about whether or not to allow the chopping of Pokemon trees. I'm getting sidetracked. The point is, to make it so that Snorlax leaves when the player uses the Pokeflute, a reskinned bone flute, I would have to change the game's code. So with a lot of Googling, and even more trial and error, I successfully completed my first C# mod in which, if a player attempted to use the tool in any of the tiles next to Snorlax, the action would be cancelled. Additionally, if the player used the action button while holding the Pokeflute, it would trigger the removal of Snorlax. At this point, you may be saying to yourself, what does any of this have to do with fish feet? This is all Pokemon, no fish feet. What does fish feet even mean? And to that, I would say, I'm about to tell you. During a later stream of Pokemon Stardew Valley, after taking some time to admire Pam's new look, an innocent slip of the tongue caused Charlie to spawn a new idea for a mod.
Oh lord, so that's Mr. Pam. Glad that we had that little meet and greet. I think what I'm gonna do for our last day is grab my fishing rod and go get some of those fun little fish that are through the woods. Because I know one of those is the king salmon. And there's a bunch of other Stardew expanded fish as well. I almost just said Stardew expanded shoes. And then I was like, nope, those are just fish. They are not shoes. There's no one stopping you from putting fish on your feet though. You know, you're right. I should. To be fair, if I was allowed to put fish on my feet in this game, you know that I already would have, like, 10 times over. Just knowing me. I like this, like, fish feet buff idea. I feel like this should be made into a mod, and I also feel like it really shouldn't be, but I'm kind of... I'm having a seizure trying to understand what you're saying. I'm having a hard time understanding what I'm trying to say. Basically, you put a fish on each foot. It's like hour 6 of streaming. Basically, you put a fish on each foot, and it gives you abilities. I feel like a Dorado would make you faster, and like if you had a stonefish on, it would slow you down, but it would make you more powerful. And guys, I really want this fish feet mod.
And once more, my unfounded confidence told me I could do that. It seemed pretty straightforward. Just allow the boot slot in the menu to accept fish, and then make an effect based on which fish is in the boot slot. Easy peasy. Or so I thought. Once I actually opened up the game's code to attempt to locate where the boot slot was handled, I quickly realized I had no idea what I was looking at or doing. Bits and pieces made a bit of sense here and there, but overall, I had no clue how to implement my genius plan. So I did what I always do when problem solving. I broke it down into smaller, more solvable problems. Good programming was going out the window and I was hacking together a mod. First step was to find a way to put fish on feet. If I couldn't figure out how to edit the boot slot, I would fall back on my content patcher experience and add a whole new set of boots to the game. One for each fish. Of course, now I would have to figure out a way to swap from the fish item to the new fish boot item when the player attempted to put the fish on their foot. To do that, I just identified which part of the screen the boot slot was on, and if the player clicked on that range of pixels, I swapped out the item that was being held, and now the newly added fish boot would slot in exactly as Concerned Ape intended. And with that, I had a proof of concept. Now you may have noticed that up in the top right corner here, there's an icon of the fish that I was wearing, and a list of effects that fish provides. This was actually not something I had created. I did some searching for other mods that might grant the player buffs based on clothing being worn, and wouldn't you know it, there was a mod called Buff Framework that did just that. So my plan was to utilize that to handle the buffs, and all I had to do was create the rest of the fish boots. Job done. With this newly formulated plan, I reached out to Charlie with what I had so far, just to see if anyone else was already making progress on a fish feet mod. Let's be honest, I wasn't exactly the perfect person for the job, and if someone more competent was already working on it, I was just as happy to step aside. To my surprise, it didn't seem like that was the case, so Charlie sent me a list of fish and effects that she had already been brainstorming. What I was not anticipating was just how creative Charlie would be with these effects. The Buff Frameworks mod could do simple stuff like adjusting stat variables in the game like speed and skill levels, and while Charlie did have some of this, she also had things like increasing your storage and gives you a red mullet, parentheses, as in the hair. These were not things Buff Frameworks was designed to handle, and I would have to be working out solutions for myself. And work out solutions I did. For 3 months, after filling in effects for the rest of the fish, I chipped away at each effect, one terribly written function at a time. My typical approach would be to search the game's existing code for functions that sounded like they might be of use to me, and make a bunch of tests to see what these functions actually did. And there was no better feeling than finding that one piece of code that did exactly what I wanted and cracked the whole thing wide open. What I ended up with was essentially a giant collage of code cherry-picked from other mechanics in the game, repurposed to create what I needed for fish effects. Finally, I had a viable build at the start of March 2024. Granted, viable was using the loosest of definitions. Every fish did something, but they didn't all do exactly what I had originally hoped. But I was feeling the pressure to get things done because a certain developer had recently made an exciting announcement. The 1.6 update was looming, and with changes for modders listed as a feature of the update, I had no clue what that meant or how it was going to affect all the work I had done. With a 1.5 version locked in, I took some time off to enjoy all of the new content in the update. When I finally got around to checking on how my mod meshed with the new update, I discovered it was fully and truly borked. That is to say, it just didn't run. With a few updates to make it 1.6 compatible, I at the very least got it running again pretty easily. But unfortunately, a good deal of the major custom modifications I had made were no longer functioning, so I took another few months to debug and work out new solutions where necessary. Now, I will concede that even though the 1.6 update did manage to upset much of my work, and in some cases, seemingly restructure the game's architecture in a way that I lost access to some features, all of the new content did provide me with a treasure trove of new code, which I could pillage and implement some fish effects that I had failed to create previously, and for that, I was grateful. Fast forward to November 2024, and I've nearly got my 1.6 version of the mod back to where it was before the update, when, the console update came out, and along with it, a myriad of other updates that yet again broke everything. Imagine you're driving somewhere and you hit traffic, so you have to find a new route, just to roll up on a different jam, so you have to reroute again? That's what it felt like. It wasn't totally unsolvable, just inconvenient timing. Based on my naive concept of how an expert programmer would develop a mod, I suspect these updates would not have been such a big deal, and with a robust code base, simple tweaks could have gotten me back online. But I'm winging it out here, stringing lines of code together with a glue stick. If something breaks, my House of Cards-esque program is gonna topple. But it was fine. I got all the holes patched eventually, and I did actually enjoy the project as a whole. And I was able to put together what I'm calling the beta version of the Fish Feet mod, and shipped it to Charlie to debut on her stream. If you haven't seen the stream, I would highly recommend checking it out. It's linked below. She did an excellent job of exploring all the effects, and I just had the biggest smile on my face the whole time, seeing everyone's reactions to this thing I had spent a year creating, even when things inexplicably went wrong.
Let's just do the sunfish, okay? Ready? Oh my god, what just happened? Okay, this happened when I was testing too, and I was like, oh, that's probably just a weird little thing. I spent so long customizing my character, and now I'm just a man.
Since its debut, before publishing the mod to Nexus, I did fix some of the major bugs, but there's still a lot of content that hasn't been included because I have yet to figure out how to achieve it. There are a few placeholder effects and some effects that claim to do things, and used to do things, which isn't actually true. So at some point, I will want to revisit this project and get all of that working, and perhaps even expand further by adding a second boot slot to allow the player to double up on fish, but who knows. For now, it is what it is, a cursed mod that I truly love. Until next time, thanks for watching.